The card arrived on a Thursday, which is how I know it was the week before Christmas, because that is when our mail gets slow and everything that should have arrived on Monday shows up on Thursday instead, slightly bent, slightly apologetic about the delay. It came in a cream envelope with a return address I recognized as my son's house, and I opened it the way I open everything from family, without apprehension, assuming the ordinary. It was their Christmas card. One of the professional ones, the kind where you pay a photographer, and a designer, and a printing company, and it arrives looking like something from a catalogue. My son Patrick, looking broad-shouldered and handsome. His wife Serena, looking exactly as she always looks, which is to say polished and slightly distant in the way of a woman who is thinking about something other than what is in front of her. Their two children, Lily who is 8 and James who is 6, both performing the specific kind of smile that children perform when a photographer says hold it for just one more. I stood at my kitchen counter and I looked at the card for a long moment, and then I looked at the back, and then I looked at the printed names along the bottom. Patrick, Serena, Lily, and James. Merry Christmas from our family to yours. From our family to yours. I set the card down on the counter. I put the kettle on. I stood at the window and watched the street for a while, the way you do when you need something ordinary to look at while you process something that isn't. My name was not on that card. Not in any version. Not as Grandma, not as Nana, not tucked in as part of a larger family. My son had signed a Christmas card, the card that would go to cousins and neighbors and colleagues and people from their church, and the name of his mother was not on it. I had been edited out. Removed from the picture. Not the photograph, which I was never in anyway, but from the list of names that meant, this is who we are, this is our family, these are the people we are claiming this year. I had been unclaimed. I finished making my tea. I sat down at the kitchen table. And I thought about the letter that was sitting in my attorney's office, the one I had brought in 11 days earlier, the one my attorney Barbara had read through twice before setting it down carefully and asking me if I was certain. I told her I was certain. She said she would hold it until I told her what to do with it. I picked up my phone and I sent Barbara a text. Just 4 words. Hold it a little longer. Because I wanted to see, first, how deep this went. And because I have learned, in 73 years of living, that the worst thing you can do when something unkind happens is to react before you understand the full shape of it. The card was one data point. I needed to know if it was the whole picture, or just the corner of it. It was not the corner. My name is Ruth Calloway. I am 73 years old. For 38 years I was a paralegal in a firm that handled estates and trusts, which means I spent my entire working life watching what happens to families when money becomes a question. I have seen families that loved each other deeply come apart over the specific and terrible geometry of who gets what. I have seen families that barely tolerated each other hold together because the numbers gave them no other choice. I have seen documents change everything and documents change nothing, and I have a very clear sense, after 38 years, of which situation I was looking at on any given case. When I retired, 6 years ago, I was not a wealthy woman in the way people mean when they say wealthy. I had a pension. I had a modest investment account I had been tending carefully since my late 30s. I had the house, which I owned outright, which in this neighborhood is worth considerably more than it was when I bought it 31 years ago. And I had one other thing, the thing that became relevant when Serena removed me from the Christmas card. I had the property. The property is a lake house that has been in my family for 47 years, since my parents bought it as a summer retreat when I was 26, and my brother Thomas was 23, and the world seemed full of long summers that would continue indefinitely. My parents used it until they couldn't, and then they passed it to Thomas and me jointly, and Thomas passed his half to me when he died 9 years ago, which was one of the many things that changed when Thomas died, most of them too large to look at directly. The property is on the lake. Not near the lake. On it. 4 acres, a dock that needs replanking every few years, a house that is showing its age in the good way, the way of something that has been used and loved and will keep going. I have had offers on it. Several, over the years, and the most recent one arrived 8 months ago from a developer, who sent a very polished representative in a very polished car, who explained very politely that they were prepared to be generous. The number they named was significant. I thanked the representative, showed him to the door, and called Barbara. I told her I wanted to write a letter. Not a will amendment, not a trust restructuring, just a letter. A document of intent, explaining what I had decided and why, to be held in her office until I determined what to do with it. She held it. And then, 11 days after she received it, my son's Christmas card arrived and my name was not on it. So I sent her 4 words. Hold it a little longer. Because a woman who spent 38 years reading between the lines of family documents knows when a card is the beginning of a sentence, and not the end of one. I was right. It was the beginning. I need to tell you about Serena, and I need to tell you honestly, because honesty requires me to say first that she did not start as the person I am describing. People rarely do. When Patrick brought her home for the first time, 12 years ago, she was 29 and working in commercial real estate, and had a laugh that arrived suddenly, and without warning and transformed her face completely when it came. I liked her. I want to say that plainly. I liked her the way you like someone who is visibly good at things and hasn't yet decided to use that goodness as a form of keeping score. She was good at things. She understood property and space and value in the way I understand documents, from the inside, intuitively. She had opinions about architecture that were informed rather than performative. When I mentioned, early on, that I owned the lake property, she asked questions I knew were the right questions, which told me she was genuinely interested and not just being polite about it. We got along. Not in the effortless way of women who are immediately and naturally aligned, but in the way of 2 capable people who see each other clearly and find the seeing agreeable. There were 4 or 5 years there, the early marriage years, the first baby years, when Serena and I were something that looked like close. When she called me without Patrick on the line, not often, but occasionally, when she wanted a specific kind of input on something and knew I was the right person to ask. I think I know when it shifted, though I cannot point to a single day or a single incident. It shifted when they started making real money. Patrick's company had a good several years in a row, and Serena moved from commercial real estate into development consulting, and within a fairly short span of time their life had expanded significantly in terms of resources and significantly contracted in terms of what they felt they needed from anyone outside it. That is how it works, often. I have seen it in documents for 38 years. It is not malicious. It is not calculated. It is the way of people who come into money after having had less of it, the instinct to consolidate, to rely on the circle that built the thing, to find that the people who were necessary when you needed them seem less necessary now that you don't. Not villains. Just human, in the way that costs the people who love them. Serena did not become unkind to me, exactly. She became remote in the precise way that is worse than unkind, because unkindness at least acknowledges your existence. What Serena became was efficient. I was a logistics item in her life. Grandmother available for Christmas, Easter, the occasional school event. Useful in a specific and bounded way. Not someone whose opinion was sought or whose presence was wanted beyond the scheduled occasions. I noticed. Of course I noticed. I am a woman who spent 38 years noticing what documents were not saying. I notice what people are not saying in the same way and with the same clarity. I said nothing. For the same reason I suspect many women of my age say nothing in similar situations, because saying it means naming it, and naming it means making it real and requiring a response. And requiring a response from someone who has decided you are a logistics item is a particular kind of humiliation that you would rather not invite. So I said nothing. And I watched the distance grow in the systematic and unhurried way of something that has a plan. The Christmas card was the plan's announcement. I should tell you what the letter said. Not all of it, some of it is between me and Barbara and will stay there, but the shape of it, because the shape is the point. The lake property is worth, as of the most recent appraisal, which I had done 18 months ago, at my own initiative, approximately $940,000. The developer's offer was for $1.1 million, which tells you that the developer believed they could do considerably more with it, which is information I filed and did not act on. The house itself has been assessed at $260,000. I own both outright. There are no mortgages, no liens, no competing claims. My will, as it has stood for the past 16 years, left everything to Patrick. He is my only child. His father died when Patrick was 22, and the years after that were years when Patrick and I were close in the specific and somewhat fragile way of two people who have lost the same person and are finding their way through it together. I had not revisited my will since Lily was born, which is the kind of thing you mean to do, and then the years go by and you have not done it. The letter was the revisiting. I want to be careful about how I describe what the letter said, because I do not want you to think it was vindictive. It was not vindictive. It was precise, which is what 38 years of reading family documents teaches you to be when you are writing your own. Precise and intentional and structured in a way that cannot be misunderstood, because documents that can be misunderstood always are. The letter expressed my intent to amend my will and the associated property trust to pass the lake property and the majority of the financial assets directly to Lily and James, my grandchildren, through a trust that would be administered by Barbara's firm, the disbursements structured around education and significant life milestones, accessible to them as adults, managed independently until then. Patrick would not be excluded, that would be a different kind of precision than I was aiming for, but the primary beneficiaries would be the children. The letter also expressed, in plain language, why. Not because Serena had been unkind to me. Not as punishment for any specific act. But because I had watched, over the past several years, the slow construction of a family narrative in which I was peripheral, in which my grandchildren were being raised to understand their grandmother as occasional and optional, and in which the values being modeled for those children were the values of a woman who understood worth primarily in terms of what things could be turned into. And I had decided that the most important thing I could do for Lily and James was to make sure they had access, someday, to something that would require them to understand a different way of measuring. The lake property is not an investment vehicle. It is not a development opportunity. It is 47 years of family summers, of my brother Thomas teaching me to fish off that dock, of Patrick at age 7 falling off that same dock and coming up laughing, of 2 generations of people sitting on that porch watching the water and understanding, without being told, that some things are worth exactly what they cost you to keep, and not $1 more or less. I wanted Lily and James to have it. I did not want it to be sold the week after I died by a woman who understood everything in the world except what things are worth when they cannot be sold. That was what the letter said. That was what Barbara was holding. And now I knew, from a cream envelope with a designer Christmas card inside it, and my name conspicuously absent from the signature line, that I had been right to write it. The card was a Thursday. The following Sunday, I called Patrick. Not to discuss the card. I want to be clear about that. I have been a paralegal for 38 years, which means I have a professional relationship with the timing of disclosures, and Sunday was not the right time for this disclosure. I called on Sunday because I always called on Sunday, and I did not want the card to change my Sunday call, because changing my Sunday call would tell Patrick that the card had landed, which would tell Serena that I had noticed, which would begin a conversation I was not yet ready to have. So I called. Patrick answered. We talked about the children, about James's school play and the costume situation, about how Lily had decided she wanted to learn guitar, about Patrick's work, about the specific variety of cold that had been moving through their neighborhood and whether I had gotten my flu shot. It was a normal Sunday call. It ran 23 minutes. I know because I have a habit of noting the duration of calls from my children, a habit I developed in the years after Patrick's father died, when the calls were very long and I treasured the length of them, and I have kept the habit even as the calls have grown shorter. 23 minutes. A normal call. I said nothing about the card. When we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand and I thought about Patrick. About who he is, which is a thing I think about more carefully now than I did when he was young and the thinking seemed less urgent. Patrick is a good man in the way of men, who are good partly by nature, and partly by the very strong preference for not being in conflict that sometimes looks like goodness, and sometimes looks like something else. He is kind to the children in the real way, the patient and attentive way that you cannot perform for very long without meaning it. He is honest in his business dealings, which I know from the people who have dealt with him and told me so. He loves me. I do not doubt that. I can hear it in the quality of the Sunday calls even at 23 minutes, the particular warmth he has for me that is different from his warmth for anyone else. What Patrick does not do is manage Serena. He accompanies her. There is a difference between a man who shapes the direction of his household and a man who walks alongside the person who does. Patrick has always been the second kind. With his father alive, that was less visible because his father was also the second kind, and they were simply a family of people who moved through the world together without anyone designating the direction. With his father gone and Serena very clear about direction, Patrick walks alongside her in a way that has been costing something for several years, and will continue to cost something until he decides to pay attention to the invoice. I knew all of this. I did not say any of it on Sunday. I said goodbye and I love you, and I hope James's costume situation resolves itself, and I hung up. Then I drove to the lake. I go to the lake in December every year. People think this is eccentric, going to a lake house in December, and I understand why. It is not warm and the dock is empty and the summer life of the place is entirely absent. But December is when I understand the property most clearly, I think, because December strips away everything optional. The ease of it. The pleasure of it. What you're left with is the structure, and the silence and the 47 years of memory that live in the place regardless of the weather, regardless of whether anyone else is there to enjoy it. I drove out on Monday morning and I let myself in with the key I have kept on my ring for 24 years, and I walked through the rooms the way I always do, checking for anything the autumn had disturbed, running a hand along the windowsills, looking at the dock from the back window. Thomas's fishing rods still in the mudroom. Patrick's handprints, age 7, pressed into the concrete of the back step by my late husband as a joke that stopped being a joke when he died and became something else, something that requires a moment every time I pass it. I sat on the porch in my coat and I looked at the water for a long time. I thought about what I was doing. Whether it was right. Whether a Christmas card was sufficient reason to take an action this significant. Whether I was reacting emotionally, when I had always prided myself on precision. And I concluded, sitting on that porch in December with the lake grey and the dock empty and Thomas's fishing rods behind me, that I was not reacting to the Christmas card. The Christmas card was the confirmation of something I had been watching for 3 years. The card was the moment when what I had suspected became visible in print, literally in print, in a designer font on cream cardstock sent to everyone they knew. It was Serena, without knowing she was doing it, putting the decision in writing. Signing the document. I know what signed documents mean. I have spent 38 years with them. I drove back to the city on Tuesday morning and I texted Barbara one more word. Ready? There is a thing that happens in families when a document arrives that nobody was expecting. I have watched it from the outside for 38 years, and now I was watching it from the inside, and I will tell you that it is very much as I always imagined it, which is to say it is clarifying in the way that only things with legal weight tend to be. Barbara prepared the amended will and the property trust over the course of 3 weeks in January, and when they were signed and filed, she sent a letter to Patrick explaining the change and its structure, and inviting him to contact her office with any questions. She sent it on a Wednesday. He called me on Thursday. Not Sunday. Thursday, at 11 in the morning, which told me everything about the state of things before he said a word. Mom? His voice was careful in the way of a man who has been briefed and is trying to figure out how much of the briefing is accurate. I said, I know why you're calling, Patrick. I'd like to explain some things. Come to dinner on Saturday. Just you, please. He was quiet. Just me. Just you. I'll make the lamb. He came alone, which required something from him that I did not take lightly. Coming alone, in a marriage like his and Serena's, where the orbit of the household is managed by one person's gravity, requires a kind of deliberate stepping outside that Patrick had not practiced for some time. I noted it. I appreciated it. I did not mention it. I made the lamb because it takes all day, and lamb that has taken all day is one of the most honest statements of intent a kitchen can make. I set the table for 2. I put the Christmas card on the table, face up, next to Patrick's glass, because I am a paralegal and I believe in evidence being present in the room when it is being discussed. We sat down. He looked at the card. He looked at me. I know, he said. I know about the card. Serena said she thought it made sense to simplify this year, and I should have said something. I should have said that's not, I should have said more. The should-haves are worth noting, I said. But let's set them aside for now and talk about what I need to say. He nodded. I told him about the letter. Not the new one, the one Barbara had been holding since before Christmas. I told him I had written it in December, and what it said, and why I had written it before the card arrived. I told him the card was not the reason for the change. The card was the confirmation that the reason I already had was real. He listened. He is, in this way, his father's son. He listens without interrupting, which is rarer than it sounds. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Mom, is it about the property? Is this about the lake house? It is about what the lake house means, I said. There is a difference between a property and what a property means, Patrick. You know that. You grew up going there. You know what it means. He put his hands flat on the table. He looked at the Christmas card. She's been talking about selling it, he said. Quietly, not as a plan, just as an idea she keeps mentioning. After you're gone. She thinks the market timing would be good and the children could use the. I know what the children could use, I said. I have thought about that very carefully. I have spent the last several years thinking about it. And what I have decided is that the children are better served by something that teaches them the value of keeping than by a check that teaches them the value of selling. He was still looking at the card. I should have taken your name off the card, Mom. Yes, I said. You should have. But Patrick, that is not the thing that matters. The thing that matters is that for 3 years, I have been watching my grandchildren be raised to understand their grandmother as optional. To see their grandmother at Christmas and Easter, and to not think of me as someone continuous in their lives, someone with a history, and a perspective, and things to give them that have nothing to do with occasions. I have been edited out gradually. The Christmas card was just the version that came in an envelope, and the question I need you to sit with tonight is not why did I change my will. The question is why did it take me changing my will for us to have this conversation? He sat with that. I let him sit with it. The lamb needed another 20 minutes, and the evening was long, and I had waited a long time to say these things, and I was content to wait a little longer for him to receive them. The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours, which is the longest uninterrupted conversation Patrick and I had had since the year after his father died. We talked about his father. We talked about what it had been like for him to watch me after his father was gone, how he had wanted to be there more and had let himself believe that being there financially, which he was, genuinely, he was always generous and never let me want for anything material, was the same as being there. We talked about the years when Serena and I had been genuinely close, and what had changed, and his version of what had changed was somewhat different from mine, and we sat with both versions without requiring them to match. I told him about Thomas. About the lake house before Patrick was born, the summers when Thomas and I were young adults and the world was full of long Saturdays on the water. About the year Thomas got sick and we went to the lake in December, the two of us, the same walk I take every year now alone, and how Thomas stood on the dock in his coat and said, "Ruth, do you know what the best thing about this place is?" And I said the view, and he said no. He said the best thing is that it asks nothing of you. You just have to show up. Patrick was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I haven't been showing up." "No," I said gently. "Not the way you used to. I want to fix that. But Mom, I need you to understand that some of it isn't. I mean, Serena has opinions about how we spend our time, and I have let those opinions become the schedule without enough input from me. And that is on me, not on her. I let it happen." "I know," I said. "I have been watching you let it happen for 3 years. But you are 41 years old and you are allowed to choose your own schedule, Patrick. You are allowed to say I am going to my mother's on Sunday, not because she is a logistics item that requires managing, but because she is my mother and I want to go." He looked like he might say something and then didn't. "I will say this to you once and then I will not say it again," I told him. "The lake property is Lily and James's now, in trust, to be theirs when they are grown. It is not a punishment. It is an intention. I want those children to have something that teaches them a different way of measuring than the one being modeled for them at home. I want them to have 47 years of family behind them in a place that asks nothing except that you show up. That is what I have given them. What I am asking you for," I said, "is simpler than that. I am asking you to show up. Not for my will. Not for the property. For me. Your mother. Who has been waiting a very long time to not be optional." He nodded. His eyes were bright. "I'll talk to Serena," he said. "I know you will," I said. "And I know that conversation will not be easy and I know you will want to smooth it and manage it and find the version of it with the least friction. And I am asking you not to do that. I am asking you to say what needs to be said clearly and to let it land where it lands, because the smoothed version doesn't actually say anything, and I need something to actually be said." He looked at me for a long moment. "You sound like Dad," he said. "I know," I said. "He was better at it than I am. But I've had 3 years of practice." Here is what happened in the months after the lamb dinner, because I know you want the full account. Patrick spoke to Serena. I was not in the room and I do not know exactly what was said, but I know the shape of it because I know my son and I know what he sounds like when he has said something he meant versus when he has said something he hoped would work. The Patrick who called me the following Wednesday did not sound like a man who had smoothed. He sounded like a man who had said something and let it land. He told me she was angry. That her first response was defensive, that she spent time in the version of events where she was not the person who had done anything wrong. That she had said things about the property that he had told her directly were not acceptable. That they had fought, a real fight, the kind that doesn't resolve in one evening, and that he was still in the middle of it. I told him that was fine. I told him that some things need to be fought about before they can be understood, and that the fighting was not the problem, and that I was proud of him for not smoothing. He called the following Sunday. And the Sunday after. And the Sunday after that. Serena came to the lake in April. Patrick called first to ask, which was itself something, the asking. He said Serena wanted to come, that she had asked to, and would I be there? I told him I would be there. We walked the property together, the four of us, the children running ahead the way children run when there is space and permission. Serena was quiet for most of it, which is not her usual register. She looked at the house with the eyes of her profession, which I could see, the assessment, the calculation, the sense of what things might be turned into. But she also, at the dock, stood for a long moment looking at the water with an expression that was different from the professional one. Something that was just a woman looking at a lake on an April afternoon. She said, "Patrick told me about your brother Thomas. That you came here after he died." "I did," I said. She was quiet. Then, "I'm sorry about the card, Evelyn." Not in the way of it was a mistake. In the way of, I knew what I was doing. I just didn't understand what it meant to you. I didn't understand that it meant what it meant. That is more self-awareness than I expected, and I told her so, which made her laugh, briefly, the old sudden laugh, the one from 12 years ago. The one that transformed her face. "I am not a warm woman," she said. "I know that. I was taught to be effective, and I got very good at it, and somewhere in getting very good at it I lost some of the other thing. The showing up just to show up. I don't always know how to do that." "Then learn," I said. "Watch the children. They still know how to do it." She looked down the dock where Lily and James were trying to convince Patrick to let them jump in the water, which was categorically too cold, which Patrick was explaining with great patience, while they ignored him with great enthusiasm. She said, "I'd like to come more. If that's all right." "It is more than all right," I said. The children were at the lake twice that summer. Once in June, once in August. Serena came both times. She came once alone in July, just for a day, without the children or Patrick, and she sat on the porch with me and we talked for 3 hours about things I had not expected to ever discuss with her. Her own childhood, the foreclosure, what that had done to her relationship with her own mother, who is a woman I have never met and who is apparently also a woman who has been made optional in Serena's very organized life. She is working on it, she said. On seeing people for what they actually are, and not just for what function they serve. I told her that is a significant undertaking. I told her that most people who grew up the way she did never get there at all, and the fact that she was trying was something. She looked at the water. Then she said, "What do you want, Evelyn? If you could say it plainly. What do you actually want?" I thought about it for a moment. Then I said, "I want my grandchildren to know who I am before I become a photograph on a shelf. I want them to know the lake and the stories and their great-uncle Thomas, and what it sounds like when this porch creaks in a specific way during a storm. I want to not be optional. I want to be someone they are glad to see, not because occasions require it, but because they actually want to. Serena nodded slowly. That's not very much to ask, she said. I know, I said. Which is why it has been hard to watch it not happening. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I can give you that. I want to give you that. I think I forgot, somewhere, that you were a person to give something to rather than a situation to manage. I think so too, I said. But here we are. Here is what I want to give you from all of this, from the Christmas card and the attorney's letter, and the lake in December, and the lamb that takes all day. There is a particular kind of dismissal that does not look like dismissal from the outside. It looks like efficiency. It looks like a well-organized life, and a tight schedule, and the understandable prioritizing of immediate demands. It looks like a Christmas card, with a designer font, and everyone who matters in the household accounted for. And if you are the person who has been efficiently removed from the picture, the challenge is that you cannot easily name it as dismissal because it does not arrive with malice. It arrives in a cream envelope, slightly bent, slightly apologetic. But the absence of malice does not change the fact of the absence. And the woman, who has been efficiently removed from the picture, is not required to accept the efficiency of her removal as permanent. I spent 38 years working with documents that changed things. I know what a document can do. But I have learned something in the time since my name came off that Christmas card that I did not know when I was filing papers and drafting language and watching families navigate the geometry of who gets what. I have learned that the most powerful document is not the will, or the trust instrument, or the letter in the attorney's office. The most powerful document is the one that makes a person who has been not quite seeing you actually stop and look. For me, that document was an amended trust. For you it may be something else entirely, a conversation you have been having around the edges and finally have directly, a choice you make to stop making yourself small in the space someone has assigned you, a simple decision to require, calmly and without drama, to be seen. The lake is Lily and James's now. They will have it when they are grown, with 47 years of family behind it and the dock that needs replanking and the mudroom with Thomas's fishing rods and the back step with the handprints from 1991. They will have the porch that asks nothing of you except that you show up. I intend to be there when they find out what they have. I am already there, every December, in my coat on the porch, watching the water. It does not matter that it is cold. It does not matter that the summer life of the place is absent. What matters is that I keep showing up. That is the only instruction that ever mattered. Show up, and keep showing up, long enough and consistently enough that the people you love have no choice, but to eventually understand that you were never optional. You were the whole point. But I am getting ahead of myself, the way I sometimes do when I reach the end of a thing and want to stay in the warmth of how it resolved. Let me go back. Let me tell you the parts one moved through too quickly, because they deserve their full weight, and I did not give them enough of it the first time through. Let me tell you about the years between Thomas dying and the Christmas card arriving, because those years are the context without which none of the rest makes sense. Thomas died 9 years ago in October, which is the worst possible month to lose someone, because October is already doing something melancholy with the light, and you do not need any help. He was 61, and he had been sick for 16 months, and we had done everything that can be done, which is to say we had done the things that slow the progression, and then the things that manage the decline, and then the things that simply try to make the remaining time what it can be. Thomas was not afraid of dying. He was annoyed by it, which is very Thomas, the specific irritation of a man who has things he would rather be doing and is being inconvenienced. He died in a hospital room with a window that looked out on a parking structure, which I have complained about to anyone who would listen since, and will continue to complain about because Thomas deserved a better view. I held his hand. Patrick was there. Thomas's daughter Clara was there, flying in from Vancouver just in time. We were all there, which is the most anyone can give to a person at the end, and which Thomas, to his credit, acknowledged. You didn't have to all hover, he said, an hour before. And then, I'm glad you're hovering. He left me his half of the lake property, which he had always said he would, but which still required a moment of sitting with the paperwork before it felt real. He left it with a note. The note said, "Don't sell it." You know why? I did know why. The same reason I wrote it into my own letter to Barbara. Some things are worth exactly what they cost you to keep. Thomas understood that without ever having needed to explain it, which is the gift of someone who has been your brother for 61 years. After Thomas died, Patrick and I were close again in the specific way that grief sometimes enables. He called more often. He came to visit more often. He sat at the kitchen table with me the way he had as a boy, with a cup of something and no particular agenda, just present. I do not think he was conscious of doing it. I think the proximity of loss reminded him of what proximity is for, and he responded without theorizing about it. That closeness lasted about 2 years. Then it began, gradually, to recede, in the way of something pulled back by a current you cannot see. Not a single moment of pulling. Just the slow awareness, over months, that the calls were shorter and the visits were fewer, and something in the texture of things had changed. I attributed it, at first, to the natural rhythm of lives. They had Lily by then and James not long after, and small children are genuinely consuming, and I made allowances, as mothers do, as grandmothers do, for the consuming nature of small children. I told myself the closeness would return when the children were older. I told myself I was being patient rather than what I was actually being, which was slowly and quietly moved to the margins. The margins are a particular kind of location. Not exile. Exile is dramatic and has edges you can see. The margins are soft and gradual, and you arrive in them without a single conversation about it, which is why they are so difficult to address. How do you say I have been moved to the margin of my son's life, when there is no specific day on which it happened, no single decision you can point to? You cannot. And so you don't. And the margin becomes your address. I lived there, in the soft margins, for 3 years. I drove to the lake in December each of those years, and I sat on the porch, and I thought about what I was going to do about it, and I kept arriving at the same answer, which was wait. 1 more year. Let the children get a little older. Let Patrick find his way back. Wait. The Christmas card ended the waiting. And let me tell you what happened in the weeks between the card arriving and the lamb dinner, because that period was not simply waiting, it was a kind of private reckoning that I think is worth naming. I went through all of it. I went through every year since Thomas died, tracing the shape of the distance, trying to understand whether what I had been calling patience was actually patience, or whether it was something else, something more like fear. Fear of the conversation. Fear that if I said directly I feel I have been made optional, the answer would confirm it rather than dispute it. Fear that Patrick would choose easier, the way people close to Serena tend to choose easier, and that the choosing would mean something I was not prepared for. I am 73 years old and I spent 38 years looking at the documents that families produce when they have not said the necessary things while they had the chance. I know better than anyone what happens when you wait too long to say the necessary thing. I have read the affidavits. I have filed the contested estate papers. I have watched children who loved each other become strangers over the specific and terrible arithmetic of an inheritance that was never discussed before it became an instrument. I did not want to become a document that arrived after I could no longer explain it. So I wrote the letter. Not as a threat. I want to be clear about that, because I have spent enough time with documents to know the difference between an instrument of coercion and an instrument of intention. The letter was an instrument of intention. It said, "Here is what I have decided, here is what I want for the children of my son, here is the reasoning behind it, and here is what I hope it will give them." It was not designed to frighten anyone. It was designed to be true, which is the only design worth having. The Christmas card confirmed that the letter was right. And then I held the letter a little longer, because I am also a woman who knows that the right time to produce a document is not always the first available moment. The right time is when the room is ready for it. The room was not ready in December. The room became ready in January, when Barbara sent the notification letter to Patrick, and Patrick called me on a Thursday instead of a Sunday. That phone call, the Thursday call, the careful voice, was the room becoming ready. And so I made the lamb. I want to say something about the grandchildren, about Lily and James specifically, because they are the whole point of this, and I have not given them enough of their own space in this telling. Lily is 8 years old and she is the kind of child who asks questions that stop you mid-sentence because they are more precise than you expected. She asked me once, when she was 6, why the lake house smelled different from every other house. I told her that places absorb what happens in them, the way fabric absorbs what it is near. She thought about this for a moment and then said, "So it smells like all the people who were here." I said yes, exactly that. She nodded slowly, satisfied, in the way of a child who has confirmed a theory she already had. She is Thomas's great-niece in every visible way. The same quick, specific intelligence. The same impatience with imprecise answers. When I told her, on the June visit, that the lake had been in our family since before her father was born, she asked how we had gotten it, and I told her the story of my parents buying it, and she listened with the full attention that children give to stories they sense are about more than their surface. Then she asked, "Will we always keep it?" I said, "I am working on that." She seemed satisfied with that answer too. James is 6 and he is a different kind of person entirely, which is as it should be. Where Lily is precise and still, James is motion and noise and the particular joy of a child who has not yet encountered a situation he can't improve by running toward it. He fell off the dock in June, which Patrick handled with admirable calm, and came up laughing, and I thought of Patrick at 7 years old, same dock, same laugh, same look of delight at having survived something. I had to sit down for a moment. I did not tell him, not yet, about the property. They are too young for documents. But I am beginning to tell them other things, the things that live in the place before the document. I am telling them about Thomas. About the summers when I was their age and the dock was new and the world was made of long Saturdays. About their grandfather, Patrick's father, who taught me that some things you keep not because they are worth the most but because they teach the most. I am telling them these things every time I see them now, which is more often than before the lamb dinner, and the January letter, and the Thursday call. I am telling them because I have decided, firmly and without the option of revision, that I am not going to be a photograph on a shelf. I am going to be a person they knew while they had the chance to know me. With stories and a creaking porch, and a dock that needs replanking and all 47 years of what it means to have a place that asks nothing of you except that you show up. I am showing up. That is the only instruction that was ever mine to follow, and I am following it now with whatever time I have left to follow it, which I intend to be considerable. There is one conversation I have not yet told you about, and it is the one that I think sits at the center of everything, the way certain rooms in a house sit at the center of all the other rooms even if they are not the largest, or the most visible. It happened on the second lake visit, the August one, the evening before everyone drove home. Patrick and I were on the dock after the children had gone to bed. It was the kind of August evening that convinces you summer is generous and permanent, which it is not, but which the specific quality of that light makes you believe anyway. We were sitting at the end of the dock with our feet not quite reaching the water, the way we used to sit when he was a boy, and the dock was the right height for that, and now it is slightly too high, but we do it anyway. He said, "I've been thinking about what you said at dinner. About how the question wasn't why you changed the will. The question was why it took you changing the will for us to have the conversation." I waited. "I think the answer is," he said slowly, "that I knew there was a conversation to have, and I kept finding reasons why this particular moment wasn't the right moment. And I was good at finding those reasons. I have become very good at finding reasons to not have the conversations that are going to cause difficulty. And I think I learned that from watching what happens when they do get had, and deciding the aftermath wasn't worth it. But what I didn't account for was the cost of them not getting had. The accumulation of the not having. Because that has a cost too, and I let it run for a long time without looking at the invoice. I thought about that. About the invoice. The specific phrase. Patrick's father used to talk about invoices in the same way, the hidden invoices of relationships, the costs that don't arrive as single large charges, but as small recurring ones that you stop noticing until the statement arrives and the total is larger than you knew. I told him, "Your father used to say the same thing. Not in those exact words, but the idea. That the small costs of not saying things were the ones that really added up." Patrick was quiet. The water was doing something calm and silver with the last of the light. "I miss him," he said. "I keep missing him differently as I get older. When I was younger I missed the specific things, the specific person. Now I miss the shape he would have been. The grandfather he would have been. The way he would have been on this dock with James." "I know," I said. "And I didn't want to. I think part of why I let myself drift from you was that being close to you means being close to missing him. And I decided at some point, without realizing I was deciding it, that it was easier to keep some distance." I sat with that for a moment. It was the most honest thing he had said to me in several years, and it deserved a moment before I responded to it. Then I said, "I know that too. And I understand it. And I am telling you, as someone who has also spent 9 years deciding how much of the missing to stand in and how much to step away from, stepping away doesn't actually reduce it. It just means you are missing him and me both. And that is a much lonelier kind of missing than the other kind." He didn't say anything for a while. Then, "I don't want to do that anymore." "Good," I said. "Don't." We sat there until the light was entirely gone and the water was just sound and the children were asleep in the house behind us with 47 years of summers around them. I thought about Thomas saying it asks nothing of you. Just show up. I thought about my parents buying this place when I was 26 and not knowing what they were building. I thought about Patrick at 7 years old on this same dock, falling into the water, coming up laughing. Some things you keep not because of what they are worth, but because of what they teach. They teach you that time is long if you let it be long, that love is patient if you let it be patient, that the people you belong to are still yours if you go back to them before it is too late. I was not too late. That is the fact I am most grateful for, the simple fact that I was not too late, that the cream envelope with the designer card arrived while I still had time to respond to it and time to sit on a dock in August and say the necessary things and have them received. Not too late. That is the whole of it, really. That is what I want you to keep. Whatever the cream envelope in your life looks like, the unreturned call, the shortened visit, the name that wasn't on the card, the table you weren't invited to, do not wait until it becomes a document. Do not wait until the only language left is the language of attorneys and amended trusts and formal letters of intent. Go back before you need to. Say the thing before it has to be extracted. Show up before the showing up requires a lamb dinner and a folder from Barbara's office. Show up because they are worth it. Show up because you are worth it. Show up because someday, sooner than any of us are prepared for, the dock will be empty and the porch will be quiet, and the only voice left telling these stories will be the one living in the walls of a lake house on 47 years of memory. I intend to still be adding to those years. I intend to be there next December, in my coat, on the porch, watching the water go grey. And I intend to take Lily with me this time, so she can see what a place looks like when it has been loved for a very long time by people who knew better than to let it go.